What do you need to know when the best Pro camera app meets Apple's new Pro image format? So developer Lux Optics haven't just added ProRAW to the list of image formats that Halide supports and called it good. They've actually used the new format as an opportunity to make some little improvements. So now when you tap and hold on the quick bar, you get a format switcher, which is a nice little time saver, but don't worry, jiggle mode is still here. You can also access ProRAW in the capture settings, but it does feel a little bit redundant, as do a lot of these options now, because they no longer need to be here. I think the developers should just double down and move a lot of this stuff into the new format switcher. Consider as well how this enable smartest processing option also now includes ProRAW. So you can shoot ProRAW without HDR3 or Deep Fusion if you like, but having those two things is kind of the point of ProRAW, so I'm not really sure why you would want to do that, as it can significantly degrade your image quality. Something else that can reduce the quality of your photos is this option to shoot in 10-bit. This reduces the amount of tonal information in your photos, and you can see the effect this can have in these examples. You should probably only consider 10-bit should you need to save on storage space. But no matter how you choose to set up ProRAW in Halide, one thing will remain constant, and that is how long the files take to process. You'd better have your timing right, because once you press that shutter, you can be waiting over 3 seconds for it to be ready to go again. Contrast this to the stock camera app, which processes your pictures in the background, which allows you to keep shooting. I personally don't mind lag too much when I'm just casually walking around shooting, as I do, but it can really get in the way when you're shooting portraits. Having to tell the person, okay, wait a second, okay, next shot, and wait, kind of ruins it and makes it a lot less fun for both you, the photographer, and your subject. But apart from that, the ProRAW shooting workflow is actually very easy, because what you see on the viewfinder is what you're going to get, just like when you're shooting hike and JPEG. I'd love to make a 20-minute tutorial on how to shoot ProRAW in Halide, but the reality is there's nothing new or different to tutorialize. You just focus, adjust your exposure compensation as needed, tap the shutter, and there you go. But what about manual controls? Surely there's a thorough demonstration to be given on how to shoot ProRAW with Halide's great manual controls. Look, you guys know, any chance I get, I will talk your ears off about Halide's manual controls and exposure guides, but honestly, after shooting hundreds of ProRAW photos in both auto and manual, there's no benefit, there's nothing advantageous about shooting manually. You see, one of the key parts of the ProRAW processing pipeline is image fusion, which merges multiple exposures together, so you can never actually be sure which settings your photo is actually shot at, and your results can be inconsistent. In fact, speaking of results, you may notice that your ProRAW DNGs look slightly different than you were expecting in Halide. And this is because when you don't have Instant RAW turned on, Halide is displaying your file without local tone mapping. Now, local tone mapping is another very important part of the ProRAW processing pipeline, and you can think of it as like dodging and burning for each pixel, which creates a more HDR-like photo. So when I turn Instant RAW on, Halide acts like our local tone mapping operator, and our image gets a more even exposure. Instant RAW also appears to correct distortion as well. And that is everything, well, in my opinion anyway, that you need to know about shooting ProRAW in Halide. With ProRAW's like extremely simple, like raise and shoot workflow, like Halide doesn't offer anything advantageous over the stock camera app. In fact, with that lag and with the lack of night mode, Halide's ProRAW experience is actually worse than the stock camera app. But this isn't a criticism of Halide, this is true of every third-party camera app that I've used to shoot ProRAW. It's still very early days for the format, and this quote from Lux Optics themselves confirms there's bigger and better things to come. They say, "We're still absorbing all of the implications of ProRAW, so we expect to continue to iterate on our features over the next few months. We have a list of things we want to improve after the App Store holiday shutdown, so if you're shooting ProRAW, 2021 is going to be an amazing year." So there you go. Just like my last ProRAW video, this one probably wasn't what you were expecting, but as always, it's the most honest and truthful that I can be. Like, I'm not the kind to pretend that there is a 15-minute tutorial necessary or that there's new things you need to learn. when there really isn't. Seriously, if you've ever shot hike or JPEG in Halide, you know how to shoot ProRAW in Halide. So what do you reckon? Does Halide have some killer ProRAW feature that I've missed? And why do you think that the developers said that 2021 was going to be an amazing year for shooting ProRAW? What are they working on? Let me know. In the meantime though, thank you so much for watching, and I hope 2021 starts brilliantly for you. Unless you're planning on like scamming people or something, then in that case I hope it all goes horribly wrong for you. Pakrund Shilamutsan. You see, one part of the ProRAW processing a local tone mapping is another very important part of the ProRAW image processing pipeline. And our image gets a more even exposure, and Instant RAW even appears to also correct the distortion.